Honored and grateful for the distinguished participants who have joined. We are very happy to have His Excellency Mr. Humayun Kabir, Honorable Prime Minister's Advisor on Foreign Affairs, um, Prime Minister's Office. And we also have a set of distinguished panelists. Let me introduce them also. We have Professor Dr. Amina Mohsin, formerly with the Department of International Relations, University of Dhaka. We have Ms. Shaheen Anam, Executive Director, Manusher Jonno Foundation. We have Ms. Taslima Talima, President, Bangladesh Garments Shramik Songhuti. We have Ms. Fawzia Muslim, President, Bangladesh Mohila Parishad, and we have Ms. Khushi Kabir, CPD Board of Trustee and Coordinator Nijira Kori. Besides that, I can see a lot of distinguished participants have joined us this evening. We are very grateful for that. So we have a presentation, but the presentation will be presented by my colleague later on because our honorable chief guest will have to leave for another program. So I'll just give a brief introduction on what we are going to discuss today and why we are discussing today. And then immediately after that, I will request our chief guest, Mr. Humayun Kabir, to make his remarks. And then we'll proceed with the rest of the program. So from the name, as you can see, that today we are discussing about the upcoming event leadership. So on behalf of CPD, I would like to thank all our distinguished speakers, our partners in the One for 8 Billion campaign, and also other colleagues. This program is being organized in collaboration with the Global One for 8 Billion campaign of the Southern Voice, which is a platform for think tanks around the world. And this has been at the forefront. They are at the forefront of advocating for a more transparent, inclusive, merit-based, and gender-equal process for selecting the next Secretary General of the United Nations. So the title of today's event is about leadership, but in reality, our discussion is about something much more larger than only the leadership, because it is about the future of multilateralism. We know that the international environment has changed profoundly over the last few decades. We are living through a period characterized by geopolitical fragmentation, prolonged conflicts, declining trust among major powers, climate emergencies, humanitarian crisis, debt distress, technological disruption, and shrinking fiscal space for development. So the global agenda is becoming increasingly driven by strategic competition rather than collective action. Ironically, this is precisely the moment when the world needs effective multilateral institutions the most. Yet, many people today are asking difficult questions. Can the United Nations still build consensus in an increasingly divided world? Can it protect the interest of smaller and developing countries when power rivalry is intensifying? These questions inevitably lead us to another question, that is, what kind of leadership does today's United Nations require? Leadership today is no longer simply about managing a complex international organization. It is about restoring confidence in multilateralism itself. It requires leaders that firmly committed to the principles upon which the United Nations was founded. The forthcoming selection of the next UN Secretary General, therefore, represents an important opportunity. It is not merely to choose an individual, as I have mentioned before, but to reflect on how the institution itself can become more representative accountable, and effective. This is precisely where today's policy study makes an important contribution. We have prepared a policy paper on this, which will be presented, as I have mentioned. So, this discussion is rather than examining the UN leadership solely through a global institutional lens, it approaches the issue from a Bangladesh perspective, Bangladesh centered perspective, indeed. Bangladesh has long been committed, has been a long been committed supporter of the United Nations. Over the past 5 decades or so, our partnership with UN has extended across development, humanitarian responses, peacekeeping, climate resilience, and implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. Bangladesh has consistently demonstrated that developing countries are not merely beneficiaries of multilateralism, they are active contributors to it. But the broader objective must be also to strengthen the integrity of the institution itself. Transparent and merit based selection processes, stronger accountability, institutional independence, inclusiveness, and responsiveness to vulnerable communities are equally essential if leadership is to deliver meaningful change. As a research institution, CPD believes that today's debate is not about advocating for a particular candidate or a particular region. Rather, it is about identifying the qualities and institutional reforms that will enable the United Nations to remain relevant in an increasingly complex world. For Bangladesh and many countries across the global south, this discussion carries particular significance. If multilateral institutions become weaker, fragmented, or increasingly shaped by geopolitical rivalry, it is developing countries that will bear the greatest costs. I hope today's discussion will therefore go beyond the immediate question of who should become the next Secretary General. Instead, I hope it will encourage us to reflect on what kind of multilateral system we want over the coming decades and what kind of leadership will be required to build that future. With this, I would like to invite our participants to and panelists, of course, to have a vibrant discussions. Uh, I also welcome our honorable advisor of foreign affairs who has just joined us for despite his busy schedule. Thank you very much for joining us today. So since
Thank you.
you have to, yeah, since you have to go to another program, we will invite you now to make your remarks. Though we have a presentation, but we'll send you the presentation to your office so that you can have a look later on. So, distinguished guests, I would now like to request the Honorable Prime Minister's Advisor on Foreign Affairs, Mr. Humayun Kabir, to make his valuable remarks. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Fahmida Khatun, Executive Director, Center for Policy Dialogue, distinguished representatives of Southern Voice and the 148 Billion campaign, distinguished members of the civil society organizations present, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to join you today or this evening from Dhaka on this important and timely discussion on rethinking UN leadership in a fragmented world, a Bangladesh-centered perspective. I would like to thank the Center for Policy Dialogue and its partners, particularly for bringing together such a distinguished group of participants to discuss an issue of great significance not only for the United Nations, but also for the future of global governance. The world today is experiencing one of the most complex periods since the founding of the United Nations. Armed conflicts continue to devastate lives, in different parts of the world. Geopolitical rivalry is becoming increasingly pronounced. Climate change is threatening the security and livelihoods of millions. Humanitarian crises are growing in scale and frequency. At the same time, widening economic inequality, disruptions in global trade, food insecurity, rapid technological transformation, and declining public trust in multilateral institutions are placing unprecedented pressure on the international system. These interconnected challenges remind us that no country, regardless of its size or economic strength, can address global problems alone. They require stronger international cooperation and more effective multilateral institutions. For more than 8 decades, the United Nations has remained the cornerstone of the international rules based order, despite its imperfections. It continues to provide an indispensable platform for dialogue, conflict prevention, peacekeeping, humanitarian assistance, sustainable development, and the protection of international law. The continued relevance and effectiveness of the United Nations, however, depends significantly on the quality of its leadership. The selection of the next Secretary General therefore deserves careful reflection. Are you able to hear me? This is not simply about choosing an individual, it is about identifying a leader capable of guiding the international community through an increasingly uncertain and divided world. The next Secretary General must possess unquestionable integrity, independence, professional excellence, diplomatic skills, and the moral authority to engage constructively with all member states. Equally important, the office requires a leader who can build consensus across political divides while remaining firmly committed to the principle of the United Nations Charter. Transparency and inclusiveness in the selection process are equally essential. A process that is open, merit based, accountable, and participatory will strengthen both the legitimacy of the Secretary General and the credibility of the United Nations itself. These are values that resonate strongly with the principles of good governance that the international community consistently advocates. In rethinking this selection process of the UN Secretary General on the appointment of the UN Secretary General, it is important that the current fragmented state of the world, that the new SG would need to have a flexible approach to addressing issues and challenges. One must have the quality of being cooperative, skilled in negotiations and political management, with a comprehensive understanding of global affairs. They must be able to stand up for the General Assembly on the basis of the values of the UN Charter. The current selection process is somewhat limited in promoting a merit based appointment, um, where we see international organizations, positions in multilateral organizations, often the composition is made up of reaching a political consensus or a political balance that often sometimes drastically leads to compromising on merit and experience. I mean, one such small example, if I may say, is the appointment of the director of South Asia in the World Health Organization. last, just a few years back, where a brutal dictator like Sheikh Hasina got her own daughter appointed to the position of director of the World Health Organization without any kind of experience, skills sets to demonstrate that she was worthy of that position, of that office, and where there were tremendously qualified candidates with public health experience, medical experience, experience of disease control and management, were sidelined on the basis of putting in a dubious candidate at the helm of the World Health Organization in South Asia. So this cannot continue to be the normalcy of reaching political consensus and balance. We've seen it at the top management level of the UN as well. Just former ministers being given jobs just because they cannot fit anywhere else without any kind of sort of meeting the criteria or essential merit required for the jobs. So it is very important that the system is overhauled to actually give more equality and equity on the selection process. In terms of at the moment, it is the UN Security Council that put forward the lone candidate for Secretary General in the selection process. This cannot be equitable and cannot be a sustainable position in terms of enhancing any kind of representation. From my personal point of view, or in my view of what I see, is that the way forward, a pragmatic way forward, maybe to put forward, to allow the UN Security Council to do the shortlist and then put that to the UN General Assembly, where then the Assembly can vote on the credibility of the candidate, the quality of the candidate, and on the merit of the candidate, rather than just putting one candidate so that they are basically ratified to be appointed, to the Secretary General position. The Security Council should put forward a short list of 3 or 4 to the Assembly, or at least 2. There should be a choice. In that way, we will somehow come near to merit. Because it's important, regardless of whether it's a woman, ethnic, someone from Asia, Africa, regardless of geography, the merit content of the candidate must be, weighted in an important organization like the United Nations. And also, we are in a fragmented world that we live in today. One begs the question whether we are already into post-multilateralism. Is multilateralism dead or moving towards post-multilateralism? So it is vital. We are seeing the emergence of alliances of countries in the absence of alliances or participation and reaching and negotiating and reaching a consensus within multilateral institutions. We are seeing a new kind of multilateralism emerging where groupings of countries, alliances are adjusting according to their national strategic interests. So if we want multilateralism to prevail, it's very important that we restore the credibility of these institutions through appointing credible senior leadership in those organizations. Bangladesh, one example I would say, in terms of if you put it to the General Assembly, the recent success of Bangladesh's candidature at the UN General Assembly for the 81st presidency. Cyprus was campaigning for almost 8 years, or some say even 10. How did we do it in such a short term? We didn't spend huge money. We did it because there was a chance to present ourselves before the General Assembly. Therefore, our candidate clearly was seen as the better candidate, the candidate with more international UN experience of handling crisis, having the necessary negotiation skills, etc. Because we got that opportunity to be selected via vote in the open, plenary of the General Assembly, not in some sort of a closed door room, etc. So, in a way, the right candidate was elected. So, similarly, for the position of Secretary General, I think reforms are required where the Security Council plays a role in doing the shortlist, but ultimately a choice must be presented to the General Assembly for a vote. Bangladesh continues to shoulder the immense humanitarian responsibility of hosting more than 1 million forcibly displaced Rohingya people from Myanmar. This remains one of the largest, most protracted humanitarian crises in the world. Bangladesh has fulfilled its humanitarian obligations with remarkable generosity, despite significant social, economic, environmental, and security challenges. We continue to call upon the international community and the United Nations to work collectively towards creating conditions for the safe, voluntary, dignified, and sustainable repatriation of Rohingya people back to their homeland in Myanmar. These experiences offer valuable perspectives on the qualities required for a future UN leadership. Countries such as Bangladesh understand the importance of an international system that protects the interests of that protects the interests of all nations, large and small, developed and developing alike. The challenges before us require leadership that is principled, courageous, impartial, and forward-looking. The next Secretary General must be capable of strengthening confidence in multilateralism, promoting peaceful dialogue, defending the position of international law, advancing sustainable development, and restoring trust in international cooperation. I commend the Center for Policy Dialogue, Southern Voice, and the One for 8 Billion campaign for facilitating this important dialogue and for contributing thoughtful research to this global conversation. Constructive policy discussions, such as today's, are essential for generating new ideas and building broader international consensus on the future of global governance. I also welcome the UN80 initiative, which looks at making the whole UN system efficient, uh, because there is a lot of waste, there is a lot of replication, and in work, we must stop the waste of solely just expanding international bureaucracy. Rather, we must streamline it to engage and be effective in it and be effective in having expertise in dealing with the challenges of today as well as various um, complexities that arise in various geopolitical space. I hope the recommendations emerging from this discussion will contribute meaningfully to ongoing international deliberations on strengthening the United Nations and ensuring that it remains responsive, effective, inclusive, and most importantly, fit for purpose in the 21st century. I thank you again. I thank you all, the CPD particularly, for inviting me, and I look forward to further engagements. Unfortunately, I have to leave for another engagement this evening, but um, I'm delighted to be able to present some thoughts as advisor to the Prime Minister of the People's Republic of Bangladesh, and the viewpoints sort of from our government on the current state of play within the UN leadership and how possibly we can put forward views and build consensus on having a more robust selection process for the selection and appointment of the UN Secretary General. Thank you. Thank you again. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Honorable Advisor, for your insightful remarks. We are really delighted to hear your perspectives on the selection of the next UN leadership position, and also happy to hear some of the perspectives of the government of Bangladesh with respect to the role of Bangladesh in the United Nations. Before you go, I would like to request you to stay for half a minute because we'll take a group photograph. So if you could, whoever are here, if you could open your camera, it would be nice to have a picture, a group picture. Yes. So Obro, is anyone on the? Yeah, who is
Yes.
taking the picture? Yeah.
Khalid, please take the pictures.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Done?
Yes, done, madam. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much once again, Honorable Advisor. Have a good evening. We look forward to having you in our next program as well. So have
I
a
very
good
much
evening.
look forward to engaging with CPD in person one day soon. And thank you again
Absolutely. Yes, yes.
for the
We very
invitation.
much look forward to your physical presence in our next program. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
congratulations to you and in the Foreign Ministry for Bangladesh's achievement in the United Nations. Yeah, so
Thank you.
it's a great
Thank you.
achievement. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so let us proceed with our program. Now, I would like to request Miss Afrin Mahbub, to make the presentation. She has prepared the presentation in collaboration with another colleague and myself, with my guidance, Aisha. Well, she's also here. But so Afrin, 10 minutes or 12 minutes so that we can listen to the other panelists. Okay, thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Honorable Advisor and distinguished participants and guests for taking the time and to be part of this important discussion. So this policy brief that we wrote, which is titled Rethinking UN Leadership in a Fragmented World, a Bangladesh-centered perspective, was written as part of this 1 for 8 billion global campaign, and it was intended to trigger important thoughts and conversation regarding the position that the United Nations Secretary General holds and what it may entail for the rest of the world, especially for the global south. So the structure of the presentation is as follows. I will first start with an overview of what the 1 for 8 billion campaign is. This will be followed by the background of the study, and then I will go on to explain the study's core part, which is framing Bangladesh's experience through an analytical lens, before concluding with a few broad recommendations as moving forward. I would also like to mention that apart from myself, this paper was also co-authored by Dr. Famida Khatun Madam, Executive Director of Center for Policy Dialogue, and Ms. Aisha Suhaimara, Program Associate for Center for Policy Dialogue. Now, I would first like to start with what the 1 for 8 billion campaign is for many of us who are unaware. But since Ben is here, perhaps he can also enlighten us a bit more in detail about the campaign's activities and what it advocates for in details. So the 1 for 8 billion campaign is a global campaign which advocates for a transparent, inclusive, merit-based, and a gender-equal process to select the UN Secretary General. This campaign is led by a steering committee comprising prominent international civil society organizations, including Civicus, Plataforma Civil, Southern Voice, UNA UK, Women SG, GQual. The campaign is further supported by a diverse network of partner organizations, including Solidarity Tunisia, Economic and Social Research Foundation, Tanzania, CIPEC, Argentina, Center for Policy Dialogue, Bangladesh, and Sustainable Development Policy Institute, SDPI, Pakistan. Now, currently, the way the UNSG selection process works is that the Secretary General candidates are nominated by governments. After that, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council recommends one candidate to the General Assembly, who later then confirms the preferred candidate by a majority vote. Now, what is the issue? The system itself is the main issue. There is no systematic transporting reporting throughout the process beyond the publication of candidates' name or vision statements. In addition, candidates can be put forward at the last minute as well, leaving no time for scrutiny. The candidate selection process is also controlled by the most powerful countries, and the recommended candidate to the General Assembly is usually the result of secret bargaining among the 5 permanent members of the Council, which is also subjected to their individual vetoes. Therefore, the 5 permanent members can choose candidates that suit their short-term interests. And the main crux of the entire issue is that no woman has ever held the post as the United Nations Secretary General. So what the 1 for 8 billion campaign advocates for is for a process that is open, inclusive, and merit-based, a process that sets out formal selection criteria and qualification, aligns with modern practices, and exemplifies the UN's ideals, a process that meets the high standards of transparency and accountability that the UN member states and civil society have been demanding for years, and a process grounded in best practices in equality and diversity, and furthermore, for a process that provides meaningful involvement from all member states, appropriate input from civil society, and that matches the standards of other high-level international appointments as well. At the moment, there are 6 candidates in line to be the next UN Secretary General, and a positive note is that out of the 6 candidates, 4 of them are women candidates, including Michelle Bachelet, Rebecca Greenspan, Maria Fernanda Espinosa, Caroline Rodriguez Burkett, and 2 of the male candidates are Rafael Grossi and Macky Sall. In consideration of this campaign, CPD's policy brief explores the kind of UN leadership the future needs amid geopolitical fragmentation and humanitarian crisis. The paper uses Bangladesh as an analytical lens to examine patterns of gender underrepresentation in UN leadership itself and advocates for a women's Secretary General. It also draws on direct insights received from civil society organizations in Bangladesh to reassess expectations for the next UN Secretary General by documenting stakeholder perspectives. Finally, it also argues that future UN reform should focus not only on creating opportunities to appoint a woman as Secretary General, but also on fostering the condition necessary for capable, inclusive, and effective leadership to emerge. What motivated our study, and is also one of the integral issues that the campaign is advocating for, that till date there has been no woman Secretary General leading the UN. It is also important to note that there is also a lack of women representation within the system as well. For instance, only 5 women served as the UN General Assembly President since 1946. Women have held approximately 7% of permanent representative roles at the United Nations since 1947. 73 countries have never appointed a woman as their permanent representative, and women continue to be concentrated in the junior and mid-level positions only. So similar to the UN system, women's representation in Bangladesh's governance and political environment is also low. In Bangladesh, women's representation remains very limited despite long-standing female leadership at the top. For instance, historically, women have held less than 22% of parliamentary seats, with majority of them occupying reserved seats rather than being directly elected. And in 2026, women held only about 16.4% of parliamentary representation, with less than 1/4, which is around 7% of the seats being directly elected. So, what are the barriers to women's political participation in Bangladesh? During our research, we have assessed that women's political participation remains very much concentrated at elite levels with limited presence at grassroots and mid-level leadership. We also found that women's participation is heavily influenced by wealth, education, political loyalty, and is very much linked to family political legacy. Reserved seats, while it does increase visibility and numbers, they do limit direct electoral legitimacy. Women often operate within unsupportive political environments that hinder their effectiveness and influence. Moreover, senior level representation also remains very limited in Bangladesh's governance system, restricting women's ability to shape key policy and decision-making processes. Overall, women's participation reflects symbolic inclusion rather than substantive influence in governance of Bangladesh. Therefore, Bangladesh's experience shows that female leadership at the top does not automatically ensure broader gender equality. This is because women remain very much underrepresented and very much concentrated in mid-level and grassroots governance only, which limits the ability to make decisions for the larger majority. Top leaders do not often represent a wider women's movement, leading to a mixed impact on empowerment. Symbolic representation, therefore, creates a facade of progress without real structural change. Now, even though the paper advocates for a female or women UNSG, it also makes it a point to highlight that while gender inclusivity in leadership is vital, it still does not equate to better governance, accountability, or institutional effectiveness. This is especially considering that ongoing challenges such as inequality, corruption, economic pressures, climate vulnerability, and humanitarian crisis in Bangladesh still persists. Now, drawing upon some of the insights that we have received from the civil society organizations in Bangladesh, we've learned that civil society organizations in Bangladesh, they have highlighted that gender imbalance in the UN leadership is very much shaped by institutional norms favoring male candidates. The nomination stage itself is very self-limiting as it stands as a key barrier since member states often put forward male candidates, limiting the pool of women leaders. Standards such as merit are only applied that so inconsistently, with greater scrutiny often placed on women candidates. Moreover, structural and political including limited visibility, credibility, and gender stereotypes, limit women's access to top leadership roles. Furthermore, women leaders are often perceived as less capable and sometimes emotional that hinder their ability to be diplomatic and affecting their chances of selection process. Greater gender parity requires a proactive nomination and support of qualified women by member states. Furthermore, CSOs have also expressed that appointing a female UN Secretary General would signal commitment to gender equality. Yes, but gender alone does not ensure effective leadership. They've emphasized that leadership qualities such as accountability, transparency, strategic decision-making, and inclusivity is quite important as well. Effective leaders must represent diverse interests, build consensus, and respond constructively to feedback. Bangladesh's experience shows that symbolic female leadership does not always ensure inclusive governance. Therefore, mechanisms like quotas and institutional reforms can improve representation, but it also must ensure real influence, not just numbers. The UN should also prioritize leaders who can address global challenges, protect vulnerable groups, and promote ethical, inclusive systems. Lastly, creating a gender-supportive institutional environment is essential to sustain women's leadership. Now, what are the expectations Bangladesh holds from the next UN Secretary General? The next UN Secretary General should strengthen the UN's role in global peace building and conflict resolution. They should focus on institutional credibility, effectiveness, and coordinated global action. The UN's humanitarian role is also very important, but its impact is often limited by dependence on member state consent. For example, Bangladesh is a major contributor to UN peacekeeping with over 163,000 personnel deployed across 40 countries and 54 missions since 1948. Despite this contribution, challenges like the Rohingya crisis highlights limits in UN-led repatriation efforts, requiring stronger diplomatic engagement with Myanmar. Therefore, future leadership should prioritize inclusive diplomacy to ensure safe, voluntary, and sustainable refugee return solutions. The UNSG must also address interconnected global challenges such as conflict, climate change, and instability, especially affecting the global south. Lastly, stronger UN engagement is very much needed in Bangladesh to support gender-based violence prevention and climate resilience. So, looking ahead, it is also important to comprehend that achieving a female UN Secretary General requires collective action from global civil society, including CSOs in Bangladesh. CSOs from the Global South currently have very limited formal influence in the UN SG selection process, but can strengthen advocacy efforts. In this context of rising geopolitical tensions, the UN requires leadership which is capable of advancing global peace and stability. Even though there were previous attempts have been unsuccessful in advocating for a woman secretary general, advocacy still remains essential as the process is highly political in nature. The UNSG selection should prioritize a leader who can address complex global challenges and uphold the UN's core mandate. Now, before I conclude, I would like to also leave everyone with a few broad recommendations. However, more recommendations can be and is encouraged through the discussion as well. So firstly, the Global South should engage with governments, especially the CSOs, including the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to advocate for nominating qualified female candidates. Member states should also actively nominate and support competent women leaders committed to inclusive global governance. The UNSG selection process should also needs to also be very transparent, merit-based, and less influenced by powerful states. Reducing political and financial imbalances within the UN can support fairer and more impartial decision-making as well. Leadership selection should also prioritize the representation of diverse and marginalized perspectives, and more women should be promoted to senior diplomatic positions within the UN system. Lastly, similar to Bangladesh, UN system can also consider gender quotas or reserved positions to improve women's representation in leadership roles. That will be all from me. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Afrin, for presenting this findings. I think Taslima, if I give you just 5 minutes afterwards, because we have Ben Donaldson, who is the advisor to the campaign. He has been very much attached to this program. He has some idea about the event perspective, and he can shed some light on the current status of LT process. So I think it is better that we hear from Ben first, and then we go to our panelists. Ben, over to you. If you could shed light on the process, that will be useful.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, Fahmina, and thank you for your contribution in the report to the global campaign and to the conversation on this, as well as to Afrin, who is a co-author of this report, which I implore everybody to read because it's incredibly useful, and it brings in the Bangladesh sort of civil society perspective and kind of maps that on to the global conversation. I think it's a very useful contribution. So look, Afrin has done such a good job of describing the campaign and what we're doing that I don't think I need to go back into any of that. So if I can just fast forward right up to the present moment and what is happening right now, it's very interesting. Some of the recommendations that Afrin mentioned that you know, 1 for 8 billion fully endorses the report that's been written, and actually that it's very aligned with the recommendations that we're asking for. But the nominations phase for candidates is almost over. It's not to say that there isn't a possibility that more candidates will come out, and you know, the 6 candidates that Afrin described we may not have the sort of the eventual Secretary General among that group, but it's quite likely that we will. The reason for that, the reason there's so much uncertainty about this whole process, and we're still discussing sort of nominations, is because the Security Council ensure they have latitude and room for maneuver right up until the very last moment. Right, nobody really knows how this is going to play out, because there is so much of the conversation and so much of the process is dominated by the permanent members of the Security Council. But there are a couple of things which I can mention, which we can be pretty sure about. Firstly, is that later this month and the last week of July, the Security Council has assigned 2 days the two last Fridays of the month to potentially hold straw polls on candidates. These are secret polls. They have already said they will not be announcing the results. That is not a consensus position within the Security Council. That is a minority position within the Security Council to have this lack of transparency. So we are working with a lot of elected members of the Security Council right now to encourage them to leak those results and to actually just broadcast them to the world unilaterally. This happened back in 2016. So we anticipate that we will find out the results of these secret polls. Now, the polls will basically give a very clear indication of who the Security Council's favourite candidates are. We're also working with elected members of the council to try and have a more objective criteria so that we can look at some of those qualities that actually Mr. Kobeir mentioned and also Afrin mentioned, so that we can actually have a less politicized process. One for 8 Billion has released a sort of documentation which talks about those sort of qualities that are required. But the thing I want to talk to you most importantly about is something that's happening behind the scenes right now, which are backroom deals, which get struck between powerful member states and candidates, which basically they're conditions of support. So we've seen in previous selection processes that almost all candidates become compromised along the way. So in order to be the successful candidate who will become the next UN leader, assurances have to be given to P5 members that they won't shake the system up too much, that top jobs will be reserved for their nationals. And this is why Bangladesh is a top troop contributing country, but has never held, for example, a senior office within the Department of Peacekeeping Operations. It's always a French man. And I say man because it is always a man. And it has always been a man. And so all of these top jobs, they are very politicized, and a lot of them are given out as favors by candidates in return for the support of those P5 countries. So one of the big things that we're doing now, because now is the peak moment for these promises to be made, is to shine a light on that. We're working with journalists. We're working with a lot of smaller and medium-sized countries who stand no opportunity for their nationals to ever get these top positions because they are all given out to P5 countries. So it means that the most consequential roles on security, on counterterrorism, on peacekeeping, on humanitarian affairs, on political affairs, these are all going to permanent members. So that is a big part of the campaign, which is a new phase of the campaign that we're really focusing on and trying to hold some of these deals accountable. And so, you know, if the advisor to the Prime Minister was still here on the call, I would be imploring him to ask his government to ask those difficult questions, to work with the groups like the Non-Aligned Movement, the G77, to put this issue front and center, because this is not a process about one person. It's not about just the very top leader of the UN. It's about a whole ecosystem of the next 30 leadership positions, which will be very politicized the way they are given out. So we need just as much transparency and scrutiny on those sort of 30 leadership positions, which are leadership recruitments, which are about to happen, where we have the same inequalities as we can see in the top position, and we have the same biases towards the status quo. So if we're going to have a UNAT or a reform program which is going to shake the system up, we need to be pushing back now on that compromises that happen, because we will never have power spread more evenly at the UN if we cannot have bold reformist-minded leaders. And we will never have bold reformist-minded leaders whilst this process is happening in the darkness. I'll leave it there, but thank you so much for your time. It's good to be part of this call. And apologies, I will have to leave before the end of the call.
Thank you very much, Ben, for sharing these perspectives and what is really going on and what really the process is. Many of us have no idea, but so delighted to learn from you. Thank you very much for your time once again. So now I would go back to my panelists. So let me start with Taslima Akhtar Lima. Is she still there? Because she said she had to go for another program. Khalid, Taslima is here. Okay, if she is not there,
I
let
can't
me
see
start.
her. Maybe
Huh?
she left.
She left. Okay, right. Okay, so Professor Amina Mohsin, who was the former professor at the International Relations Department of Dhaka University, now also she teaches at another university, and she's a renowned analyst on political and international issues. So we're really happy to have you. Over to you, Abba.
Uh, Thank you very much, Fahmida, and thank you very much for your kind introduction. It was good that we could, the presentation was there and one could walk through the processes. So let me try to broaden the discussion a little bit. When we talk about UN leadership in a fragmented world, it's not only, I mean, I would want to look at it like not only the person who is leading it, but also what kind of institution we have. Because we often say when we teach our students at the course in international institutions, one of the, sentences or the cap sentence is that an institution can only be as powerful as the individual member states want it to be. So no matter, unless there are structural reforms within the UN, I mean, no matter who the leadership is, that leadership cannot bring about much. It's not that I'm not saying that they cannot bring about any changes, but many of the changes or strategic changes that we are looking for, that is very important for us. And when we say that that institutions can only be powerful, you have to look at the constitution of the or the charter of the UN General Assembly. You have to look at the structure of the United Nations, and I think the major two stumbling blocks, if we look at the UN system today, is the veto power that that the Security Council has, the P5, that one keeps on talking about. Since we are talking about raising voices, so one needs to raise this voice very strongly about what can we do or what should we do about this veto. And there, I think that the UN General Assembly has a major role to play, because UN General Assembly, it represents the entire, all the members of the United Nations system, or all the members of the world. So in the member states of the world, in that case, I mean, this voice should be, one should start raising the voice that what are the or one should start questioning that what power dynamics are going to dictate or lead the United Nations in future, because the world of 2026 is definitely very different from the world of 1945. I mean, that was a different scenario. This is a different scenario. If one talks about the nuclear power, or if one talks about your nuclear powers or the P5 or the powerful states, if you look at the geopolitics today, it's, I mean, the technology of warfare has changed totally. The Iran-US-Israel war has brought it out very, very clearly. We have different kinds of threats the world faces today. I mean, we have crisis of survivability, which brings in, when I talk about survival issues, it brings in the climate change, climate issue, issues of refugeehood, issues of statelessness, issues of geopolitics, the mad war game that we are seeing all around the world. I mean, I'm zeroing down the crisis or the world in 2026 into 2 points. One is survivability, one is trust issues. So what kind of values do we want to bring in to, or norms do we want to bring in to the United Nations system. That's why I said that one needs to change the power equation between the Security Council and the UN General Assembly. The UN General Assembly represents all the member states of the world and the world community. So it should be given more power. And one should reconsider and rethink about the notion of veto, or whether it should be limited to the P5 only. And that is something very important for us to decide. Because unless these are changed, we can't expect a very dynamic leadership. Whether a man is there or a woman is there, it would not bring about, I'm saying, much strategic change in the quality of leadership that the UN gives to the world. And second point, like in the that I want to point out, that in the 70s, the UN declared the UN Decade for Women. In 2000, we found that the United Nations adopted the Women, Peace and Security Council resolution, and in which Bangladesh had played a very pivotal role. So there, I think it is very important when we talk about fairness, to bring about fairness in the system, equality, transparency in the system. Fairness demands that a women leader should be there at the helm of leadership of the UN body. Famida, just tell me when I have to stop, I'll just stop. Why I'm saying this, because as you have also pointed out in your presentation, and that in the 80 plus years, so far, we never had a women secretary general, or we have, and though, it is said that the UN bureaucracy is quite, there is parity in gender balance in the UN bureaucracy, but your study revealed that they are at the lower rung of the offices. So it is very important that, the UN, when you talk, and we did expect when that the UN declared the 1970s as a decade for women, that UN would have structural reforms as well as reforms within the system where we would see the women would be more visible. And when we say visibility about women, it is not only about numbers, it is also about policies, it is also about budget, it is also about norms. And let me come back to the crisis that I said that the world faces today. If you look at the crisis, like survival, trust, I think there, when in your presentation also and in your introductory remarks, you said that women are considered to be emotional, women are considered to be not hard. But at this point of time, where, the world needs emotional leadership, sensitivity. The world needs, because it's an issue of trust. It's an issue of survival. And the kind of problems that we face, like which can be addressed through SDGs, which can be addressed, like the refugeehood. I mean, these are humanitarian issues. And these wars, what is happening in Gaza, what is happening today around the world in Ukraine, I mean, these are humanitarian casualties. And this is just a masculine ego, which is driving us to, the world today towards these things. And also, we are facing the rise of the rightist forces, the cultural pushbacks, and it is the women's voice, which is much more stronger in it, the voices of the marginalized, and we have to take a bottom-up approach. And there I would stop by saying that we need a restructuring of the UN and a readjustment or power alignment between the UN Security Council and the UN General Assembly. And definitely we, a gender-sensitive approach towards solving the world problems today. Thank you. I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Amina Mohsin, for sharing your insights, very insightful deliberation. And you have brought about really very important and right focus of the selection process, which should be, and what is currently the system. Thank you for your open and candid opinion on this. So we would move to the next panelist, Ms. Fauzia Muslim, President, Bangladesh Mohila Parishad. Fauzia Appa, over to you. 5 to 6 minutes, that would be useful. Thank you.
Mida, for inviting this such an important discussion. And after Amina Mohsin speaks, nothing is left, I think. Till then, I will like to emphasize on the point. I think even first should realize what is the people of the globe aspiration to UN. What we want from UN body is social peace, is sustainable development, a living world that people want from UN. And that's to be ensured by its policy, by its law, and by its action. And in this regard, we can think about how is the globe at present. Amina Mohsin had told everything. I can only raise 3 points. We see conflict, climate, we have made a big havoc in climate changes, and the digitalization of the world. And women are in very center of these 3 points. So if you want to solve the problem of the world, we have to consider about the women. And we can see that women are raising their voice every time against climate, against conflict. They are more sufferers and they are raising their voice, and for the digital world also. So we need a gender sensitive secretary. There is no compromise to this. And I think women's leadership is more gender sensitive, will be more gender sensitive. So we should shift to women leadership. Now we can go there. I can set an example in this today's world, the multi-power system. If you look at the United Kingdom, you can see the 2 ladies lead United Kingdom as a power, as a world power. But now today, England has lost this all power because of it is running through so many problems. So I think women leadership can run a state in a more compassionate, more directive, more leadership. In this regard, I think the demand of the time is the women leadership in Iran. Then comes the 3rd point. What is the electoral system? The electoral system for every country of the world, even advocate for fair, transparent election. So we want to see the transparent election in the UN system also. And that is I think this is the main, point of today's discussion, as mentioned in your policy dialogue. And many internal points raised by Amina Mohsin, we can think about all these things. And I think we need a different leadership, different type of leadership at the moment. And that is, as told by our advisor, this is not the time for only choosing an individual. We have to choose we have to find out a system which can bring peace to the world, which can bring climate for women's for development, and can lead world to sustainable development, and can use the digital process for human development. So we have to think over the point what we want to do. I think with this I would like to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fauzia Muslimapa, for your important points you have added to what has Professor Amina Mohsin mentioned. So your points have echoed and strengthened those points as well. Now I would request Ms. Khushi Kabir, who is a member of CPD's Board of Trustees and coordinator of Nijirakori, to make her points. Khushi Appa, over to you.
Thank you, Fahmida. Thank you for inviting me. And it was interesting listening both to your presentation the CPD did for the 148 billion campaign, as well as listening to the speakers before me. I think it's very important that we look at, sorry, 1 minute, I'll just be there. Looking at your policy, hearing your policy brief, looking at rethinking UN leadership in a fragmented world and the Bangladesh-centered leadership, and that's what we are discussing today. Now, if you look at what over 80 years ago when UN was formed, what was the mandate that was the basis for the UN being formed? And we look at it today, over 80 years later, and see, is that mandate still relevant? And how has the UN filled it? The reason I bring this in is to understand how we want to rethink UN leadership in case it's working, in case it's not. And with the world being more fragmented now than ever before, it was fragmented when it began 80 years ago. So more fragmented now, if you look at it, then we need to understand what the situation was and what the situation is now. So if it was like maintaining international peace, looking at international peace and security to stop wars between countries and to be a possible platform for dialogue, we look at it now and we see, is this something that the UN has been able to do? Have wars stopped? Even amongst its member states, it's not been able to do anything. Wars are escalating. Look at the state of the world at the present moment and what these wars are doing, not only to the nations and the people within those nation states, but to the world at large and the population and the peoples of the world at large. So you look at that and you see, what role has UN played in this huge escalation of wars in all these countries? Have the P5, the permanent members of the Security Council, who have such immense powers to veto anything, to decide who should be in the leadership, what the mandate will function. The mandate has been given, but what it will function. Has the UN been able to play any role whatsoever? And we look at that and we see no, it's been quite a dismal failure. And despite that, we still continue to believe in the UN and hope that the UN can bring in some amount of sanity into this world. The other mandate that the UN had was protecting human rights, to ensure fundamental freedoms for the population of the world and all the countries, and especially countries that have just come out of a war. And we see even that has not been met. Human rights violations across the globe in almost every country is there, and it's rampant. And no matter what resolutions one may take, what kind of signature campaigns and petitions one may do, human rights violations continue unabated. We look at the third, which was fostering international cooperation and to resolve global economic, social, cultural, humanitarian problems. I'd only say that only in somewhat in the humanitarian aid has the UN been able to play a role? And I ask myself, if the UN wasn't there, would this global humanitarian assistance on certain issues by certain nations and peoples at certain times of crisis would still be there? And I think given the human beings' own feelings, that this would have been there despite the UN. So I say all this of how the UN has failed us dismally, despite the fact that when it was formed, there was a lot of hope for it. I didn't see it when it was formed. I wasn't even born then. But if I remember from the 60s, when I was a little bit more aware and trying to keep track, in the 70s, definitely much more aware, 80s, 90s, now we are into 2025. The slope has been going downwards, where the hope and faith and for the UN exists. I think given this situation, and given the situation that the world has been in its most dismal situation since the Second World War, it is time for UN to start creating its own, recreating itself and getting back its own position. And for that, what you all are suggesting, that the citizens of the world and all the nation states, especially the smaller and the less powerful, not the P5, the others, all get together and make a very strong, concerted voice. So therefore, I thank you for calling this meeting for Bangladesh, but also thank the organizers who have situated the situation, and I'm sure they're doing this in other parts of the world too, that maybe we can come together and raise a very unified voice in what we want the UN to be. So if we want the UN to start looking at its own leadership in different ways, we have to start looking at rethinking the UN leadership. Yes, definitely, we need women in the leadership. I think it's not just because we think that you should have a woman in the leadership because you need a woman. When over 50% of the population of the world remains unrepresented at any space, at any place, when they're ignored, when you just have a few women coming to certain positions, then you wonder what is the state of the mind of people and of the nation states, that they cannot even think of women being equals in an equal situation and being given leadership roles equal to what men are being given. Why is this so? And there has to be a total rethinking of this male-led club who decide that men should be there. So yes, we need a woman, that is definitely there, but we need women of substance where there are many of substance. There are many women of substance who could fulfill not only the role of the Secretary General, but any of the other leadership, that is, roles that are required within the UN system. I think if UN system takes on, after having these decades of women, after having the platform for action, after having CEDAW mandated for every country to try and follow, it's time that it starts looking at itself as an institution and see, are they following their own policies and principles and conventions that they have decided on? Is it something that they hold themselves accountable for? And therefore, we need voices other than the male dominant voices that keep coming in all the leadership. So coming in after, having other speakers, after you've given your presentation, after hearing everybody else, I think for me, I don't have very much to say, except to say that I do agree with the steps you all are thinking of, but I do think that we need to take this discussion wider. Discussing the UN should not be a prerogative of only a certain category and class of individuals who can come together and who we think will think globally and beyond their own life. But if every life on the planet matters, I think this discussion should be taken in saying, how do we want to see, like if we ask in simple languages, how do we want to see the leadership of the world? Just as we say, how do we want to see the leadership of our country? So I want to thank you for having organized this and for having invited me. I'm sorry I don't have very much more to add to what has already very brilliantly been discussed and the suggestions being put forward. I agree with them. And with those, I'd like to end here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kushiapa, for these insights. Really, you said you don't have much to add, but I think you really very authoritatively and very boldly talked about women's leadership. And you rightly pointed out that there are women of substance who are equally qualified or more qualified to hold top positions, not only in the UN, but across around various organizations, and it is also it's heartening to hear that the expectations of the citizens of the world have not been met through this important organization, despite the fact it was created with a lot of hope and expectations. And we see that these days various sorts of problems, multidimensional problems are emerging, and how the UN system has been failing to address those adequately, and particularly in favor of those who are weaker. So thank you once again. Thank you all the panelists. Now I would like to open the floor for a while. If you have short comments or any questions to any of our panelists or to the presenter, we'll be happy to do so. We'll be happy to give you a floor. So the floor is open now.
Assalamu alaikum.
Yes.
Dr.
Yeah.
Fahmida, I am
Yes.
Anwara Begum.
Yes.
I have 2 questions and 2 suggestions for the policy brief, if you allow.
Yes, sure.
My first question is, like Ben has very aptly pointed out, there are a lot of barriers, especially the 5 nations, major powers. Now, how can the UN ensure that its next Secretary General represents the interests of both major powers and vulnerable developing countries facing challenges such as climate change, debt, inequality, and influx of Rohingyas and Afghans, plus India's push-in? And my second question is, as we graduate from from one status to a higher income status, how can the United Nations help shape an international financing architecture in which eligibility for climate finance reflects not only income per capita? Climate financing is based on income per capita, which is unfair to Bangladesh because it is risk prone, but also objective measures of climate vulnerability, adaptation costs, and resilience needs. How can the UN design it in such a way that this financing of climate change can explicitly be placed, designed alongside income in allocating concessional resources? So these are my 2 questions and 2 suggestions for your policy brief. I have gone through the policy brief, very, very well formulated, and somehow or the other, I found that everything was extremely well done. But at the same time, if the references that are given here are all, then I have nothing to say except that you may decide to include government's documents on the status of women migrants, climate change, and government's priorities following crisis for coping strategies. And the other reference that you can bring in is from the Rohingya camps, reports from the libraries of the NDC, Army, and the aviation forces. They are doing a lot of work in the hill tracts of Chittagong, and they have reports on the law and order situation over there. So we need to get out of this quagmire of influxes of people from other countries. And another suggestion to you is that if you would kindly put in a very short tabular form of the themes, make it thematic to reflect the deliberations of the civil society organizations that have been. You have done a survey of FGD, maybe. So I think a bit of insights into the suggestions that have come forth from the civil society organizations would actually illuminate the thoughts that go into this report, the policy brief. So I don't know whether you can change it at this point, but maybe more references would be a great step forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and Dr. Anwara, for these recommendations and also the questions. Two questions are really difficult, and that's what we were all discussing, that how the UN can resolve all these problems. These are the questions you have referred to are really emerging issues. The core mandate has not been even fulfilled. Now, every other day we are seeing that new problems are emerging, and the dimensionality of the problem has made the solutions also even difficult and complex. So I don't. It is a longer discussion. We can discuss that later. But any panelists would like to, respond to her questions briefly, please. You're welcome. Both three of our panelists are here, so it is open to you. So, would you like to respond briefly?
Thank you, Famida. I think I would like to respond the first question, not the second part of the first question, but just the first part of the first question, that how the UN can accommodate the problems and issues of the major powers in countries like ours. See, this is what we were discussing about. Like when I talked about the democratization of the UN by giving more power to the General Assembly, it's like bringing about a change in the mindset. The way the UN is structured now and the way the bureaucracy thinks over there. If the voices of the South and the voices of the marginalized or voices from Asia, Africa, Latin America, if these come together, then one can think of moving towards the resolution of the issues. You said that you pointed out the problems of the major powers and problems of ours. If you look at the major powers, they are facing the same kind of issues. By the way, they have these. They are facing problems of climate change. Survival issues are there. Maybe they are economically well off, or technologically they are better off. But otherwise, at the common person's level, these are the same kind of issues. These are common humanitarian threats. So if we can come to a consensus that these are common humanitarian threats, one can move towards their resolution. That's why I had said in the beginning also that we need to move away from the power politics approach towards a human power politics centric approach. Thank you. I'll just stop there.
Thank you very much. Any other comments and questions? I don't see any hand. Kushepa, would you like to respond, or do you like to?
Not really, I think. These
Okay.
very large questions that cannot,
Yeah,
that
it is.
need a very, you need to sit and discuss it at
Right.
length.
Yeah.
Something that you can just give a brief, quick response to.
Yeah, absolutely. And the second part of the question also, it's like, yeah.
Very deep questions, but need a lot of discussions.
Absolutely. That's what, it can't be really briefly discussed because the second part of the question is also very important. In fact, we are working on that. We have another program on multilateral development finance, actually, which is drying out. And though it had a very important role in Asia and African countries, which had really helped for poverty reduction and also increasing access to education, healthcare, all of these, and also humanitarian crises, natural disasters. But the recently published report of the OECD that has again indicated that how the multilateral development finance is declining, and we'll have to think about different modalities of financing. So that's a vast area for discussion. But thank you for raising these issues. So Afrin, you want to say something?
Yeah. Well, if I may, so we've, as part of the campaign, we've also done something called a candidate analysis, where we have gone through the interactive dialogue that the candidates have in the General Assembly, and we have considered thematic pillars where they have spoken about topics like peacekeeping and peace building, humanitarian action, development and inequality, human rights and gender equality, gender, youth and civil society inclusion, climate and UN reform. And they have spoken very broadly about how to restructure the financial architecture and also how to bridge the gap between also addressing the interests of the P5 members as well as the marginalized communities and the vulnerable communities as well. So I will attach the link to the chat, and everyone can have a look at the reports that we have published. And I think that will give a much more in-depth knowledge about what the candidates are talking about and how they plan on addressing such important issues.
Thank you very much. I think we are running out of time. We were supposed to close at 7:30. It's already 7:43, 45. Do I see any hand? So anyway, I would like to conclude again, reiterating some of the issues. I don't want to, make it longer and repeat, but then the issues of the leadership at the highest level of multilateral system has been discussed, and the crisis and the problems have been highlighted by our panelists aptly, and we have learned that the leadership requires a moral authority than anything else, as much as diplomatic skills. It requires high levels of diplomatic skills, but also it also requires moral authority, because decisions have to be taken, and it requires independence and the capacity to take independent decisions while navigating the geopolitical realities which are evolving every day, and also the issues of developing countries like Bangladesh, which are confronting various overlapping crises, economic crisis. Then the issue of finance has been mentioned, debt vulnerabilities, climate issues, which are also discussed, food security, technological issues, all of these. So the task is very difficult, but then we also want to hope that the new process of selection of the next Secretary General will be will be through a transparent and robust process, and we'll see a kind of leadership which will be, which will be shaped in a way that can that can address some of these challenges more aptly, in a transparent manner with high moral strength. But I don't know, because the last issue which has been mentioned by one of the participants is that how UN can address all of these. You have mentioned many challenges, but I feel that without reforming and organizations which have been there a few decades, I think, it's the 8 decades before. So an organization which was founded several years back cannot address the current day problems without reforms. And these reforms of the multilateral system has been mentioned at various global platforms. G20 member countries have highlighted again and again the reform of the UN system so that it can address the challenges which the world is facing today. So we hope that the process will be we will be in a transparent manner, as has been mentioned earlier, and we are looking forward to that process, and we are hopeful that the problems of countries like Bangladesh and the global South will take a significant position in the agenda of the global discussion in the United Nations and beyond, actually. So with this, I would like to end. Thank you very much, each and everyone. Thanks to the panelists for their insightful points, and you have really enriched the discussion. And also the other participants and members of the media who have been here with us. As always, thank you and good evening. We look forward to seeing you again in the next program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Farida.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, madam. Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you, Afrin.
Thank you.